So Jay Walker wears a lot of different hats. He is an organizer with the Clean Air Council. He is secretary for the Allegheny County Transit Council, active longtime member of Pittsburghers for Public Transit. And what else am I forgetting, Jay?
I'm also chair of the Allegheny County Green Party.
Yes, that's right. So take it away, Jay. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jay Walker, he, him pronouns. I work for Clean Air Council as a community organizer, mostly working in Clairton and also with the Neighbors for Clean Air program. My first thought, just kind of a reaction to the reading, I really, the part about sort of how air pollution kind of doubles down on other sorts of inequalities that are already existing, that really made me think of our work in Clairton and about how not only are they suffering direct air pollution health problems that come from that, but just the other day there was an article in the Trib about how Clairton School District is there was the most inequality in adjacent school districts between Clairton School Districts and Jefferson Hills School District, and about the poverty that's in Clairton, and that part just really resonated with that. Helen asked me to speak about public transit and walking and biking infrastructure and sort of alternative transportation and how that can affect emissions. So one of the things that, one of the emissions that results from mobile sources, which Rachel referred to earlier, vehicle emissions, is particulate matter 2.5. At a Board of Health meeting last year in May, they showed a pie graph where they showed that 25% of the PM 2.5 comes from these mobile sources. So when people think about reducing those mobile sources, they talk about transitioning into transit, reducing the amount of driving through biking or walking, things like that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the traps that come in those discussions, some of the kind of solutions, policy solutions that we can have, and also some of the things we can do right now. So one of the traps I wanted to talk about was electrification. A lot of people think that electrification is the magical solution to all of our emissions problems, all of our climate problems. If we just swap out every car that's powered by gasoline for a car that's powered by electric, we're just going to magically fix everything. But there are a lot of problems with that. There are still emissions that come from electricity, at least like definitely in our current electrical system that often get forgotten about when we're talking about electrification. But there's just a massive push in our society and our culture to kind of like, when we're switching to a carbon-free economy, that we just completely swap out everything we're doing in a carbon-full economy and just swap it out for an alternative that's just going to be a magical solution. And that's a big trap because we're not going to be able to completely swap out our lifestyles and keep everything exactly the same while eliminating emissions and making everything magically better because we're plugging our cars in now. So that's one of the big traps. We're going to need to reduce the amount of driving that goes on, not just convert one car to one electric car. Another thing that can be a trap is free fares. So Pittsburgh Public Transit is very supportive of free fares. I'm very supportive of free fares. People look to free fares as a way to make lots of people start taking transit. But if you think about the Pittsburgh context, a lot of people right now do have free fares, and they're not taking transit. So if you think about CMU, Pitt, everyone that's kind of involved in those communities has free fares now, yet many of those people still drive a lot. Lots of those people do take transit, which is good. But lots of those people are also not using transit at all. Another group that has free transit in Pittsburgh is people who are 65 and older. You all have free fares. And I think, there's a lot of people that don't realize it, but there are also a lot of people who, there's a bunch of different hurdles that need to be overcome that can help people increase their ridership of transit. So one of the issues is free fares can do a lot of things. They can be a big marketing campaign for transit, which is really good because then there's a communication element that's done. But they can also be used for poverty reduction. Fares are the biggest burden on those who can't afford them, and those are the people who are using transit the most. So free fares aren't bad, they're good. I'm supportive of free fares. They're just not, if we get free fares, people are just gonna magically all take transit. That's not how it works. What gets people to take transit is frequency. That's what we need to be investing in. And right now, we're kind of limited in how much we can spend on transit, so that needs to be focused on frequency to get more ridership instead of immediately eliminating fares as the first thing. Because we're having a transit funding issue, which is a big problem. Let's see. Another trap is looking at transit, walking, and biking in a vacuum. So one of the things people want to do is make a certain part of the city really walkable, bikeable, transit accessible without considering all of the other impacts of housing, the fact that housing is a commodity right now. What that would do is make it so that there's one neighborhood that's really expensive to live in that everyone wants to live in, and many people who work in the neighborhood won't be able to live there because they can't afford it to. So we need to look at alternative transportation in a wider context, and not just in the narrow mind of let's just swap out cars for bikes. So for example, some policy solutions, we need to have affordable housing near transit. We need to improve sidewalk infrastructure. That's often left out when thinking about transit and alternative transportation. You need to get to the bus stop and get from the bus stop. Another trap is thinking that buses are bad and trains are good, which is a weird thing, which is there's definitely a racial element in the idea that buses are for poor people and trains are for middle-class people. So that needs to be overcome because in our city we have buses and they're really strong. And we have bus rapid transit that is better than the rails that we have. Yet people, for some reason, can't overcome the idea that taking buses is bad or taking train is a good thing, and we need to invest in trains instead of buses or something like that. Some short-term things you can do, you can join your local advocacy organization. So Pittsburgh's Public Transit is one I'm involved in. Bike Pittsburgh has good advocacy for biking, and they're also starting a bunch of neighborhood groups. So one thing that I found that I learned from Pittsburgh's public transit is when you engage in these kind of advocacy groups, you learn a lot about, one, what are the systems around everything you're trying to engage in. Two, you kind of flex your civic muscle a little bit, so you kind of, you get a better understanding of the sense of your power. And once you use that power a little bit, you want to use it more. And the solutions are not going to come through individual action, but through collective action. And the only way to get to that is through these sorts of organizations and gathering with your neighbors and kind of understanding how different systems work. I guess I want to end with individual steps, which I don't like because I much prefer collective action, but individual steps are good too. So one thing is practicing what you're preaching. A lot of people like to really talk up a big game when you're talking about walking, biking, taking transit, and then they don't do those things very often. And I understand that transit and biking is not possible for everyone, but it is possible for many more people than realize. So I think the first step in that is to experiment a little bit. Try taking transit. There's some people who have never taken transit in the city or have only taken it to like Steelers games or something like that. Try going to some place, try incorporating a transfer in. One thing that really helps with that is the transit app, which is used to see when the bus is coming. It tells you exactly when the bus is coming, and it helps with route planning. Another thing you can do is you can give cycling a try. There's a lot of bike shares available in the city. You can just rent a bike for a couple of bucks and just see what it's like to get to someplace in your neighborhood, something like that. I think just like with collective action, these are sorts of things that become easier when you start doing them, and it's a cultural thing, and it's sort of like building a habit. You don't have to bike everywhere, but it's going to be easier to advocate for the changes that we need to see when more people are kind of on board. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you so much.